the fact that candidates can now use ChatGPT to generate a CV and automatically apply. We were even playing around recently with some browser tools, which just go and apply one by one to every job for you on LinkedIn, Seek, and Indeed. And so I think that probably each person out of work is applying to way more roles than they were before.
Welcome to the All in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify to stay tuned for our weekly episodes. I'm your host, Lydia, and with us this week on this special edition is Tim Freestone, founder of Alooba. Good to have you with us, Tim.
It's a pleasure to be here, Lydia. Thank you so much for the invitation.
What inspired you to create Alooba, Tim? I mean, what gaps were you aiming to address with this platform?
Yeah, so the story starts about 6 years ago. Alooba's 6 years old, almost to the day. And I used to work in the travel industry for one of the major players there, leading the analytics function of this business. A big bit of my role was to hire analysts, data scientists, SQL developers, those kinds of characters. We took a pretty typical approach like any company would. We put up job ads on LinkedIn, manually screened CVs, did the phone screening interviews, did our own take-home tests. It was a lot of work. My biggest pain point was always interviewing candidates in that first round who on paper seemed to have the right skills, seemed to have the right experience. Their resume stood out, but then many of them in that first interview showed they didn't have the skills they said they have. So I realized how inaccurate a tool a resume was when deciding who to bring into that interview round. And so we had these take-home tests that we give candidates where we give them a real data set from the business. They go and do some analysis, do some modeling, answer some different questions, come back and present it. That was really effective, but it's a lot of work for candidates to do, especially early on in the process. It was a lot of work for us to grade. So what I was looking for was some kind of simplified version of that would be online, that we could give to all the candidates who apply rather than just manually reading the CVs and trying to come up with a more effective, more accurate way to screen candidates. And so that was originally why we created Alooba.
Now, you've already built and people are using this and it's grown in the past 6 years. So what's the most surprising thing that you've seen about how companies approaching the hiring process and how they use it?
Yeah. For the first 5 years of the business, we were focused on data-related skills. And so we would typically be pitching our product to leaders of data science teams, data analytics teams, BI teams. And so they'd be the main users of the product. An assumption I always had was that they would be quite data-driven in the way they think about hiring, because in their day-to-day jobs, they are running, marketing analytics, product analytics, data science teams. Like it's all about, making data-driven decisions. And so I thought that would translate across to people and how they hired. It doesn't at all. Most people, even in data professions, still make the kind of gut feel-based decisions, which I find really surprising.
So they have the data on hand, but they still go with instinct. Is that what you're saying?
At the end of the day, no matter if a data leader or anyone had a report that said, objectively, this is the best candidate for the role, and they thought otherwise because they'd met them and they just didn't like them, they are never going to hire them. So no metrics, no data is ever going to trump just their core intuitive belief, which I would not be surprised that would apply to anyone, but to a data leader whose whole job is around using data, I was kind of surprised at how dismissive they would be of the use of data in hiring to make people decisions.
So how do you circumvent that? Is there an element of counseling?
I think lots of things have happened through time. If I think back to the last 6 years, one is just the fact that we haven't tried to oversell our product in terms of what it does. So we would say that it's a bit of the hiring puzzle. It's not going to give you the complete picture of everything you need to know about the candidate, because ultimately they'll still want to interview them, get a feel for them. Even if that's kind of subjective and vague and is based on their gut feel, they're going to do it anyway. So we came in and said, well, okay, instead of having to create your own test, which is a lot of effort, why not use our product off the shelf? It's already got all the content. It's in an online platform. It's got cheating prevention. And so we ended up kind of just repositioning our product a little bit in their eyes.
So now we're going into a different topic, which is a wider one. We're seeing exponential growth, like increasing demand for AI-related jobs. So our team at Manatal has actually analyzed more than 100,000 AI-specific job listings across all the top job boards and just to see if there is a demand for AI talent, and it has peaked. So the data that we found has shown a staggering one, 373.6% surge in demand for AI-focused positions as recently as the last quarter of March 2024 compared to previous year. The question is, are recruiters and agencies equipped to source and assess AI skill talent on this kind of scale and this increase in demand?
I don't think so. No, is the very short answer.
Mm.
And I think there's a fundamental challenge in the way recruitment has been set up, in the sense that a recruiter, either in an agency or in a talent acquisition team, is normally a generalist. And for technical roles where they're hiring for, it could be an AI role, it could be a software engineering role, it could be a data role. They themselves don't necessarily have any skills or background in those roles they're hiring for. Yet they're being asked to do a lot of those initial screening calls and the searching and the sourcing, which I think puts them in a very challenging position. And I try to empathize with them and think, if I tried to hire, I don't know, a civil engineer or someone that's like completely outside my skill set, honestly, I would have no idea what I'm doing. I'd at best be able to ask my friend who's a civil engineer and get some feedback from them. Maybe after I work in the industry for a little while, I'll start to get a sense of the lingo. But at the end of the day, I'm still not a civil engineer. I can't really get to the bottom of their skill set. And so I think that's the same with any kind of technical role, especially with AI, because it's changing so quickly that even an AI expert really doesn't even know necessarily what the right skills are, because there's a new model released every week. So I think it's a very difficult challenge. And if I were a recruiter or a talent team, I'd be looking at involving some kind of platform that at least gives you a sense of the skills of a candidate. That will be one way to go about it. Or relying more heavily on the hiring managers in the business who are experts in those fields. If I think back to lots of the customers we spoke to over the years, normally analytics leaders, they would have ended up taking up a lot of the burden. But I got a sense that a lot of the time they didn't quite fully trust their recruiters to do the screening step for them. Again, because they're not an expert. So they would say, hey, like, you send me the resumes, don't worry, I'll screen them. And so I suspect we'll just see more of that. And it's a difficult challenge for recruiters to solve.
What might be some immediate steps to bridge that gap in knowledge and expertise?
I would be thinking of either engaging some kind of expert in the process. So maybe recruitment agencies should be thinking more of like domain experts as recruiters. Is it beyond the realms of possibility that you hire a former analyst who's like an analyst consultant and get them in as a recruiter? Because then they add that domain knowledge and expertise. I've seen a few recruiters in Sydney take that approach. So that will be one option. One is to use a third-party assessment tool of some description to then give you some kind of sense of the person's skills. And a lot of the time, I think they'll end up relying on their client that they present the candidates to do the majority of the screening on their side. And sometimes the clients are happy to do that because they realize and expect that the responsibility is on them to do those technical evaluations.
Now, going back to that surge of 300% that we're seeing in AI-related jobs, right? Will this huge growth sustain itself, or are we witnessing a sort of temporary bubble?
I think we haven't really touched the sides yet of what these large language models can do. One thing I like to think about is just even in day-to-day life, all the problems that we have and all the ways that AI could improve that. You might be able to see behind me, even just the plants back there, which are real, by the way. One of them was looking a little bit sick about a week ago, and I was removing it from its soil and had some weird, funky looking stuff in there. I used the video mode with ChatGPT, gave me an immediate analysis of what was wrong. It told me what to do with it. And so that's just one tiny problem. You can imagine thousands of other similar things that we're not even really thinking about. Even the most avid AI lover probably isn't using it at its fullest at the moment. When it comes to business and hiring in particular, we are not even touching the sides yet. Right. If I think of all the people I've interviewed on our podcast over the past 4 months around how they're using AI in hiring as an example, not even touching the sides, maybe help with writing a job description, maybe summarizing some interviews. But in terms of all of hiring, could it be done with AI completely? And so there's got to be so many other domains in business where we haven't even touched the sides. And that's just in certain industries. Like there's other industries that don't even use spreadsheets to make decisions yet, like aren't even a kind of ground dot when it comes to using data.
Hmm.
And so they also have a long way to go. I think there's so much upside, and I don't think we've dealt the growth of AI yet at all.
Definitely. So you're going to see more jobs coming out, more jobs evolving from the jobs that we're seeing right now, right?
I think so. And it's also probably not just AI specialist roles
Hmm.
that have clearly surged, but also expectations that anyone in any role would have some kind of AI knowledge. Obviously not at the same level. We're not building core models, but an expectation that you would know how to prompt ChatGPT to get a reasonable answer. Maybe you've used another one of the models, and just almost like that acceptance of using AI in day-to-day jobs. I think that is where a lot of the growth in demand for the skill set will come, as opposed to AI specialists.
And so, Tim, on that note, what industries or roles do you think are most affected by the rise in AI-related jobs these days?
I think so far the best use of large language models that I've seen has been in content generation and coding.
Hmm.
I feel like content marketers and software engineers are probably the two where I'd be looking at large language models very closely and keeping up to date with how they go and using them to your advantage. And the example of a software engineer, I think it'll get to the point in the next year where the idea of writing code from scratch yourself will become very silly because it's very inefficient. It'll be more of a model where you tell the AI what exactly you want. It produces the code, you QA it, and it's done.
Hmm.
And so I think there's going to be an adaptation needed from people in software engineering roles to rethink their core function, almost like a repositioning of them as more like a product owner rather than a coder. I feel like that's a big one. I think written content as well, from some of the stuff we've done at Alooba, which is staggering the volume and speed at which you can create
Indeed.
good enough content for content marketers. I'd certainly be keeping an eye on that.
Now, we'll move on to job market dynamics. We're seeing figures from LinkedIn reporting over 220 million people globally have listed as open to work. And that's a 35% increase from last year. Is it really getting harder for candidates to land a job these days? What are your thoughts around using that badge?
Yeah, I feel like there's a market downturn. So that's one major factor in why it's more difficult to find a role, because there's fewer jobs and more unemployment. I wouldn't be surprised if we went back 5 years to the last downturn. There might have been a similar peak in those open to work badges. There's other factors at play. One is the fact that candidates can now use ChatGPT to generate a CV and automatically apply. We were even playing around recently with some browser tools which just go and apply one by one to every job for you on LinkedIn, Seek, and Indeed. And so I think that probably each person out of work is applying to way more roles than they were before. And then the other thing is there's more transparency over applications per job than there used to be. Like I know on LinkedIn, you can see the applications
Number
count.
of applicants, yeah.
I don't think you could 4 or 5 years ago. I wonder if that transparency feeds into the narrative of, oh my God, I can't get a job. I have to compete with 1,000 people. And so maybe that's also creating a sense of a bigger problem than what there is in reality, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So with assessments being one of those stages that you have to go through before you can get an in-person interview, do you, from your experience, see an increase or decrease in the number of people who are underperforming in assessment?
No is the short answer. So we haven't seen grade inflation or deflation through time, either as a result of people using AI tools or people being out of the market. So no, we haven't seen much change there at all so far.
Now, going back to the open to work badge, there are some people who view that negatively, while others say it's a way for candidates to get all the help that they can get. So what might be your perspective on this divide?
Yeah. I think if I were a candidate looking for a role and I was out of work, I probably would lean against using it because I think the downside's probably greater than the upside. Having this debate, I feel like that tells us what the answer is, because let's say it's 50-50. Half of people think it's desperate. Half of people think it's a good idea. Well, if half of your audience would perceive it as desperate, then you have to go along with that. So I probably wouldn't use it. If I were looking for a job, I would take a very strategic approach. I would focus on leveraging my network, trying to get a foot in the door behind the scenes. Like, who do I know at a company that I want to work for? Or my top 10 contacts, who do they know that's currently hiring that might cross over with what I know? I would kind of work behind the scenes to get some kind of warm coffee introductions and those kinds of things, rather than applying with everyone else, because it is very difficult for anyone to stand out when you're applying with another 1,000 applicants and you could just be another resume. And so I would try to go behind the scenes, and I probably would lean against using the open to work banner myself.
Right. So it's building value through your network.
Yeah, this is admittedly a long-term play. Like, I think if you're an early stage career graduate, you probably don't have much of a network established. And if you're suddenly out of a job, you probably don't have weeks or months to have these coffees. But given enough time, I would definitely take that strategy. Networking's a long run game. You might not get anything out of it today, but you plant these seeds, they will grow and you can help each other through your career. I can think of numerous cases where that's happened to me personally. Even the investors in our business, which we raised capital from 5 years ago, were people I used to work for. And so that's a great example of turning up on time every day, doing a good job, networking, transforming into something really powerful.
Tim, let's talk about assessment, the integrity of assessments in an AI world, right? So what sort of innovative assessment approaches have you found to be most effective when it comes to evaluating real skills while minimizing, as you mentioned earlier, right, AI-assisted cheating?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because whether using AI is considered cheating is a gray area of, well, would we want to discourage someone from using a tool that we would want them to use on the job, versus this idea of saying, well, yeah, that's great, but I want to get a sense of the raw candidate and adding AI to them later. Because of this blend of opinions, the way we set it up in Alooba is opt-in for the company when they're doing the recruitment. So they can either turn on or off various features to make it a more or less aggressive cheating prevention setup.
How does that work?
So basically you can say, okay, I want to have screen recording on. When the candidate starts the test, they have to limit themselves to one monitor. The company can do a full screen recording of their screen and their webcam. We then do analysis on that image and video stuff to check for things that we think are a little bit strange. We measure all their keystrokes, all their clicks, all those kinds of things. And so, we leave it up to the company to decide which of those features they have in and out. What I will say is, I don't think this is something that you can eliminate entirely. My view of any kind of cheating, whether it's with AI or getting your friends to help you or anything like that, I think it's just about making it annoying, difficult, and costly enough for the candidate that only a very small set will actually bother to try doing it. And even then, you'd have to be very clever to circumvent the prevention mechanisms. The other thing that's really interesting about this is because we've been running our platform for 6 years, we have a great data set about how candidates approach tests before, after AI. And so then the differences are very obvious. And so we can also use that to kind of flag what we think is suspicious activity.
So what does the data reveal in terms of, you've got 5 years worth of data and you're seeing a surge in AI usage over the past 2 years at least. Have you seen anything that sticks out?
Yeah, and probably fairly obvious things. So we measure certain events in the test, like someone tries to exit the test window to look for something. Previously, we would have said, if you want to go and Google something, that's fine. We've written the questions in a way that you have to actually interpret it and solve a problem. So if you want to Google, that's fine. But now candidates are doing that more presumably to go off to a large language model or a Perplexity or something and get the problem solved on their behalf. So that's certainly a metric that we've seen increase a lot in the past couple of years.
Now, Tim, when it comes to acceptable AI-assisted preparation, right? So where should companies draw the line between what is acceptable in terms of AI usage and preparation? What is inappropriate use during the hiring process?
That's a great question. And I've asked a similar kind of question on our podcast for the past few months. And it's an absolute 50-50 split on where people sit on this. Some think none at all. A minority would say, don't let candidates use AI at all. Funnily enough, even Anthropic, the creator of Claude, in their comms to candidates, they say don't use AI at all because they want to get a sense of just the pure candidate without AI involved. Others have said, oh, look, they can use as much as they want as long as they tell me about it. They're honest and open. Others have said, I know they're going to use it anyway, so let's see how they use it. And so they almost bring it to the fore of the conversation and say, show me your prompts. Like, why did you write the prompt this way? What were you trying to achieve? I think that's probably the most mature approach. Realize that it's going to happen and then see how candidates use it, especially if you want them using it on the job and how they use it is relevant. What I will also say is, like, even when we were hiring ourselves for sales development people, we had some questions in our evaluation process that I was actually quite surprised they used AI to answer. These were questions like, imagine it's day one at Alooba and you've been hired. What are the 3 things you need from us to be successful in your role? And it was a very personal question that I really wanted their opinion on. A lot of them still copied and pasted what they got from ChatGPT very clearly. And so that was kind of annoying to me because I'm like, I don't care what a large language model thinks. I care what you think. And so like, personally, that's where I've gone a bit too far. If you're using it just to give opinions or information about yourself, I don't think that's a great use of it, but that's just my view.
In the hiring process, when it comes to situations like this, I mean, when it comes to giving feedback to that candidate, is this something that is worth talking about when it comes to feedback if a candidate is rejected from a role?
In terms of getting feedback on their use of AI? Yeah, I think companies should be transparent about that. If you've explicitly rejected a candidate because you feel as though they've used AI, that's very important to know because that might not be clear at all to the candidate. And other companies they're applying to might have the exact opposite view of AI. They might be encouraging it. So yeah, if you are automatically rejecting candidates using AI, definitely be transparent and be careful with that because it's not always obvious they've used it or not. I've read input of candidates and I'm 90% sure they've copied and pasted it from ChatGPT based on its formatting, based on the word usage, based on seeing their answer to that question versus their answers to another question where the style of writing is very different. But it's kind of hard to do that in an automated way. So I would be careful of automatically rejecting candidates if you feel that they've used AI.
Now, going back to skills assessments, how do you see this evolving over the next few years as AI tools become more and more sophisticated?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see where this will end up for the whole hiring process, actually, not just the skills assessments. I feel like AI interviews will probably come to the fore because the technology has matured so much and maybe things that companies used to evaluate more in a skills test, they might start to evaluate in an AI interview. Some things I've seen coming out of here seem pretty exciting. And I think maybe it's time that an AI interviewer could do as good or a better job than a human, certainly for early stage screening interviews. So I feel like that will be the main development in moving over this kind of voice AI interviewer model to then cover off technical skills, soft skills, history of the candidate. You can wrap a lot into an interview. And so I suspect that's where a lot of it will go over the next couple of years.
Well, thank you very much for your time and your insights, Tim. We've covered so many interesting points in this episode. It all has to do with the growth of AI jobs, AI-centric jobs, and definitely there'll be a number of people who are listening in who might want to connect with you. So where can they find you?
I can find us at our website, which is alooba.com. That's ALOOBA.com. And they can also connect with me on LinkedIn. If they search for Tim Freestone Alooba, I will surely come up as the first result.
Thank you very much, Tim. And we have been in conversation with Tim Freestone, founder of Alooba. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more weekly episodes from All in Recruitment.